Once upon a time.
And, Debbie King is supposed to be at your house tomorrow night?
As far as I know, I haven't heard otherwise.
But
Hey,
Laura,
so
Laura
I
and
guess
her
that
can
means
get their
that-
cake and ice cream tomorrow night.
Hey, if you wanna bring it tomorrow.
Ladies Bible study must be at your house tomorrow evening.
It is.
That was so nice last week outside.
Hopefully it's cool enough because I'm not.
Hello.
So we have to stay
They
outside.
ain't coming to look at your house.
I have too much, oh my
And
goodness.
if they do come to look at your house, send them on home.
Last night, yesterday, I worked 12 hours. But I barely needed
Did you bring,
a shower.
you bring something cold to drink?
So
I'm
bad.
hanging in there.
I'm jealous. Extra super.
Huh? She didn't show you?
No. All I saw was the I respectfully quit.
So that's. Morning tonight. I can never tell.
Yeah. Coffee's off. Put that off before I turn that on.
Yes. Yes. I'm sitting at the table. Laura's not gonna be here. She's tired, so.
Okay.
Hi, Amber. It was nice meeting you.
Oh, thank you. It was so nice of you guys to meet her. I appreciate that. Hey! Are you serious?
What?
What?
The number one, as in she's the first.
She's my favorite number one granddaughter. You're my favorite number three granddaughter.
Chandler's his favorite #1 grandson.
Austin's
And
my
Austin
favorite
is his
number
second.
Hey, all I can tell you is it's better to be the third than the number
Yeah.
two. I've had to live with
Second
that
now.
my whole life.
Are you a middle child?
My baby.
I don't know. Where am I in the lineage? I'm the first member of the R's.
They have a mine more than ours.
My dad had 3 children, actually had 4 children. One died shortly after birth. He had 4 children from his first marriage, and my mother had 2 from her first marriage. And then between the union of my father and my mother, there was 3 more. I'm the first of 3. I'm part of the weans. The us'ns, the them'ns, and the weans.
What about the Ewans?
They're in Texas.
There you go. You gave the same response I was going to.
I thought it was Ewing. Ewins is a whole nother family.
I saw the real on family.
Actually, I got a picture of it and I said, look what they gave me.
So Laura, you gave some squash to them to give to us at the end of the season when you were heading out. And one of them I saved all the seeds from. But I don't, all the seeds, I saved seeds from. So I just thought, well, I'm just gonna try to grow it this year. I don't know what kind of squash it was, but I grew it and they're coming up great. So I just called it the Laura Hopcroft squash.
My brother-in-law, he had a compost pile in the back of his yard, and he had his garden up, and they had dogs, and he had his garden, and he had things around it, and that would didn't matter, right? And, the dogs would eat everything, and it wasn't growing, but in the
Oh, good.
But in the compost pile, there was all kinds of, squash and pumpkins growing out of the compost pile. It should be a sweet potato or dumpling delicate,
Okay.
they call it that, or acorn.
Okay.
Too bad.
It's yellow.
slanting, right?
I don't even know if you want one. I got you one because I figured you guys come in
The Laura's have
right
crops.
the last.
There you go.
So when all your squash come in, if you get zucchini, I'll spiralize it.
Sounds good.
Well, speaking of vegetables, there's some by the back door back there. They got they're not ready to eat or anything. You can plant them in your yard if you want.
There's some okra out there and there's some tomatoes.
All right, very good.
Somebody gave me
It's
plants
6
for the
o'clock.
night.
You know what that means?
Yeah, it's time to turn that music off.
I like to give it a minute or two. I mean, we advertise on Facebook. Join us by the conference call, so I don't want to quite hang up quite yet. Although that
It's two steps. So
that's not important. All right. Anybody got any good news? Anything you're thankful for?
I started a second job today.
Okay.
Second part-time job to help pay for school that starts in August.
Okay. Cool. Congratulations. Yeah, and if you need a third job, Chuck's hiring. Always.
I did that for 3 summers.
Oh, nice, okay, cool.
All right. Anybody?
Thankful for air conditioning.
Oh,
And it's almost Friday.
yeah. That's right.
Work's been crazy.
Riley got to play in the pool today.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
The pool is about
Swimming
that big
pool's
around.
open. Come on over.
She's about that big, but
Yeah.
That's always good. I think I heard somebody.
She loves it.
I still hear the music.
Laura's probably on
Okay. All right. Anybody else?
I'm thankful for air conditioning.
Yeah.
I'm thankful for my talk with Miss Opal today. She just makes my day. Edison's gonna cut down trees in her backyard, but according to her, they're not taking it away. But the city said if she brings them up to the front of the house, then they'll pick them up.
So Miss Opal's chopping
So Miss
firewood
Opal
for
thinks
me.
she's gonna take down the trees and stuff. And so then
Wow.
I'm telling her, no. I said, Larry, Debbie, and I will come over, and Larry's got a truck with it. No, finally at the very end, she said, well, I'll see what Fred says. And I said, don't go out there and bother them and tell them what to do.
Man, I'm just envisioning seeing her swinging an axe or a chainsaw out there.
I totally saw it, can see her doing it.
I
Wow.
know, when I call and she doesn't answer, I worry, you know.
Yeah.
And then, it's because she's been in the backyard working.
Gotcha.
She can hardly walk. I mean, I have to hold her. Every place I take her, I have to hold on to her so she doesn't fall over. And she goes in the backyard and works. I don't know how she does it. But it's just, if somebody, I don't think I'll make it that long, but if I do, I hope I have the spunk that she does.
Right.
I thank God for the nice weather, and my sister-in-law sent me a card. It's got like a kitty in a basket. It says, warm wishes for your birthday. And then inside it says sunshine and flowers. I said, okay, I got the sunshine, but I didn't get no flowers.
Oh,
So, and everybody is invited to stay afterwards for cake, ice cream cups that I brought.
yeah. I was just gonna share that. She brought ice cream and a cake. So,
So,
I didn't know if you were gonna
I'm-
share that.
I'm-
well, if you didn't share it, I was gonna share it for you.
I'm thankful
So,
we can finally turn off the furnaces. We're getting to 90-degree weather, that's nice.
it's Michigan, man. You need to keep the furnace maintained because you never know. You never know.
My feet still get cold. Underneath my desk at work, so I will use my
Yeah.
space.
I'm just saying, in his house, you need your winter coat all year long.
Not anymore.
Somebody else can throw some stuff out.
Good.
The attic,
Right.
it's so hot up there.
It is.
When we first got our air conditioning, they were sitting on the couch, the three girls, and Vera was,
Little.
and I was sitting over the top of the air conditioning unit, you know, and I'm sitting in my lounge chair, in my Chase, and I'm kicked back, no shirt on, in shorts, and they're sitting over on the couch, and they had on sweaters and blankets.
And I said, honey, do you see anything wrong with this picture?
I said, yeah, y'all guys
He
is
said,
crazy.
what? He said, what? I said, we're in winter clothes here?
I keep my house cold too. My mother-in-law, we
I
never
work,
took her.
I work outside all day. I come in the house, I don't wanna feel 90 anymore. I wanna feel 70.
Well, 70 was fine, but that 58 was not getting it.
Oh, that's funny.
Okay.
We're supposed to be talking about good things here.
Yeah, so
It kind of turned
I am
Shut it off.
thankful
Fan
for
broke.
our
My
neighbors
clean fan broke
because our
yesterday.
canopy broke with the wind a couple weeks ago. And the neighbor decided he was going to build a new deck, so he had one of those parachute style canopies that he just gave to us. And then my neighbor next door had taken down the fence along the side, and he's gonna do something else with it. Of course, it's taking him a year, but it's okay. Because he gave us the poles, the railing, to use to hang up the canopy so I can have shade, because we have no shade in my yard, so.
well, nice. It's good to have good neighbors. As soon as we're done with this table over here, I'll turn the music off. So there's some motivation.
Back up. You thankful for something?
Thankful for assistance.
Oh.
No,
It's
yeah,
passed on. Well, we'll just go with your favorite Rachel.
colors.
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 I don't know why they for them, they're just there. They're pretty to look at.
Okay.
Thankful that at AHG, Rachel's moved up to my group.
Okay. So AHG, Rachel moved up. Yeah.
I'm thankful for strawberries because it's National Strawberry Day.
I didn't know that. Did you know that, Chuck? I know. I'm slacking. Slacking.
I'm thankful for safe trips.
I did.
What about Mr. Glenn over there?
Well, we're not done with this table. Yeah. But we'll come back to Glenn if he's. Yeah. Jody, did you say something? Safe trip.
I'm thankful for my time that I've been able to spend with you guys,
Yeah.
but I'm going back to work on Monday, so I'm gonna be
Well, we've been glad to have you here.
Because my finances say, hey.
Who's
it's time
gonna
to go back
keep
to work.
him
Just-
in line then?
Sure, we're getting to the end of Acts, and you know what we're going to be doing next, and I'm going to be giving out homework. So you're like, oh, it's a good time to.
Well, the ladies.
Don't worry, I'll bring you some home.
Yeah, there you go. I'll have extras. Glenn, do you have anything? I wasn't going to put you on the spot, but it is good to have you here. Thankful to have you here. Yeah. All right. I think that's the end of the. There's nobody on there, so. Boom. Now everybody's thankful for that.
Quiet.
Yeah.
We're all thankful for that, being off.
Put that on airplane mode so I don't get any
When we
spam
were
callers.
Worshiping at our table, like out live, that would be on for 15 to 20 minutes early.
Yeah, so you guys can't stand it for 5-10 minutes. We were like,
Oh, no. No.
we would sit there, literally, we're sitting there going, please somebody join, please somebody join. And then Laura, you were usually the first one. And we're like, yeah. Is there,
What about the time that Hayden and I could talk to each other, and he was in Ohio and I was in Michigan?
that's cool, right?
And we couldn't get you.
Oh,
I mean, I was in Florida, and then
Yeah.
we couldn't get you, and then Chuck had to put me on his phone, and Hayden
Yeah.
had to
gotcha,
go on Joe's
yeah.
phone.
So Addison, you didn't bring your computer tonight? All right, well, if you're joining us on YouTube, I'm sorry, we can't. Oh, you're watching on your phone. Okay.
Y'all, I'm thankful for the technology to
I almost forgot.
Yeah. Well, glad Laura's there. All right. I apologize. I did not see Addison's little phone she had sitting there propped up. So cool. So glad to have you here, Laura.
I'm thankful that I don't have to put any more devotionals together for AHG for another 5 months.
Couple months? 5 months? Is it really that long?
No.
It's not that long, but
3 months.
3
Yeah.
months.
Wait a minute, what are you
Two,
trying to put off on me now?
two and some change, maybe?
I was gonna
Well,
let the
and
elders
I
from the
had some
congregation
comments
come in and do devotionals for the
They
first.
probably can't figure it out.
And then she told us a few times.
So you got some plans, huh? All right, we're going to jump into the book of Acts. It's a long chapter.
One thing at the very end.
So it's really long chapter. So last week, you remember how long class was?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, this class is probably, I don't know, it may not be that long. We'll see. Last week, we were in which chapter?
26.
All right, 26, and what letter of the alphabet were we on? Z. So what was Z last week? Zealous, all right, toward God. I was thinking about this. Paul was zealous toward God before he became a Christian, right? And then wasn't he equally as zealous for God after he became a Christian? So Paul never lost his zeal. There's that, today we might say a person's all in on something. You know, Paul was all in for God, regardless of, even when he was wrong. And sometimes people are like that too, aren't they? So just a...
It kind of, because when we look, we see the church of Laodicea, it says, I wish that you were either hot or cold.
Yeah.
Paul was
Yeah.
hot.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's easy to take somebody who's on fire and put them on fire for the right thing.
Yeah. And sometimes people start off on fire, but then that fire wanes. And that's kind of what was happening with the church at Laodicea. Yeah. All right. So tonight, I might as well just turn the slide here. We're in chapter 27. We're going to start back with the letter A. So arriving safely on shore. This chapter has been called the beginning of the fourth missionary journey. That's kind of an unofficial title of it. It's also known as the journey to Rome, Paul's journey to Rome. There's a lot of detail in this chapter. I was on the fence. I thought about breaking this chapter up into two parts, but I really couldn't find a good division in the chapter, so we're just going to try to get through it. There's a lot of geographical locations, so that means there's a lot of cool names in this chapter. And there's also a lot of nautical terms that's used in this particular chapter as well. We'll address some of those along the way. I was thinking about this, and not only is the book of Acts a book of history, right, for the early church, but I was looking at this chapter, and we know that Luke wrote the book of Acts. I was almost envisioning Luke as taking a journal of everything that was going on to them while they were on this particular ship. So we'll look at some of these nautical terms as well. I find it kind of interesting. Anyway, verses 1 through 12, we see Paul's travel to Rome begins, and Paul gives some advice, and he's ignored in verses 1 through 12. So Paul's travel to Rome begins, and Paul's advice is ignored. So starting in verse number 1, the Bible says, "And when it was decided that we should sail to Italy, they delivered Paul and some other prisoners to one named Julius, a centurion of the Augustan regiment. So entering a ship of Andromitium, we put to sea, meaning to sail along the coast of Asia. Aristarchus, a Macedonian of Thessalonica, was with us. And the next day we landed at Sidon, and Julius treated Paul kindly and gave him liberty to go to his friends and receive care. When we had put to sea from there, we sailed under the shelter of Cyprus, because the winds were contrary. And when we had sailed over the sea, which is off Cilicia and Pamphylia, we came to Myra, a city of Lycia. There the centurion found an Alexandrian ship sailing to Italy, and he put us on board. When we had sailed slowly many days and arrived with difficulty off of Cnidus, the wind not permitting us to proceed, we sailed under the shelter of Crete off Salmone. Passing it with difficulty, we came to a place called Fair Havens, near the city of Lasea. Now when much time had been spent and sailing was now dangerous because the fast was already over, Paul advised them, saying, "Men, I perceive that this voyage will end with disaster and much loss, not only of the cargo and ship, but also our lives." Nevertheless, the centurion was more persuaded by the helmsman and the owner of the ship than by the things spoken by Paul, and because the harbor was not suitable to winter in, the majority advised to set sail from there also, if by any means they could reach Phoenix, a harbor of Crete, opening toward the southwest and northwest, and winter there. So let's pause there. And let's break this even up into a few different sections. Verses 1 through 6. This is the last of the we passages in the book of Acts. And by this, it tells us that Luke was with Paul during his imprisonment in these last 2 years in Caesarea. And he was with Paul on this ship as they were making their way up to Rome. Who were they turned over to? And what was this particular man's occupation? You look back to verse number 3, yeah, Julius. And what was his occupation? All right, he was a centurion of the Augustan regiment.
Which is the elite of the Roman guard.
So I know we're going to talk about this again here in a minute, or I'll just reference it, but he treated Paul kindly. And I do think it's interesting that there's several times that centurions are talked favorably. How about Cornelius, right? He was a centurion, and he was referenced as being a godly man with a good reputation amongst the Jews. Anyway, this city that's got a really weird name. Was it a city? No, the ship. What was the ship's name?
Yeah, A.D.
All right, so you were cheating. Adramyttium. Yeah, so it was an ancient city in Asia Minor. So the ship was named after this particular city from Mysia. And so Paul was on the ship from that city that took them as far as Sidon. Again, verse number 3. Who else was with Paul and Luke?
Other prisoners.
Okay, other prisoners. What about a guy who's Aristarchus? Do we know anything else about Aristarchus?
He was a Macedonian from Thessalonica.
Okay, he was a what?
Is that what you were looking for? He was a Macedonian from Thessalonica.
All right, very good. He was with Paul as well in Ephesus. Remember during the riot and the attack where the whole city was in the uproar and they were chanting, "Great is Diana." Yeah, well, not Ephesus, but Aristarchus was there with him. Acts chapter 19, verse 29. He was also part of a small group that was waiting for Paul as Paul was going to make his way to the city of Troas. Acts chapter 20, verses 4 through 7. So there's a couple references of him there in the book of Acts. He's also mentioned in the book of Colossians, where Paul was under house arrest. I think this is really cool. Paul wrote the book of Colossians at the end of the book of Acts. He was under house arrest, Acts chapter 28. And during that time period, he wrote the book of Colossians. And while he wrote that, he refers to Aristarchus as being his fellow prisoner. So Aristarchus would have been under arrest with him. You can read about that in Colossians 4 and verse number 10. And then in Philemon in verse number 24, he's also referred to as a fellow laborer with Paul. So there's a few mentions of Aristarchus in the New Testament. Jody, you got a question?
You had mentioned the second time in Acts 24 through 7. What was the first time?
Acts 19. Yeah, verse 29. Yep. All right, so how did the centurion here treat Paul? All right, nice. And what did he let Paul do?
Take liberty.
Go
See his friends.
and
All right.
take care.
So that's pretty trusting, right? To let a prisoner go, see friends, get some care, probably get some supplies, be taken care of. He trusted Paul would return, right? I think it says a lot for a Christian that the centurion knew that he could trust Paul. They set sail toward Cyprus because the winds weren't cooperating. And, I'm not much of a sailor, but I would imagine that if you're in a sailboat, you're kind of at the mercy of the wind a little bit, right? I know that there's things you can do to help steer you, but you're kind of at the mercy of...
It's much harder to go against the wind.
Yeah,
That means you gotta have somebody.
right.
Well, also, it's a really big difference if they're gonna go under Crete to get away from the winds. I mean, it's from where they were. It's gotta, but how much more time on their travels?
Yeah. And they weren't going to be sailing at some of the most favorable times, as we're going to see here in a little bit. Verse number 5 is a geographical list of places they sailed near to, and where did they end up stopping?
They came to Myra.
Myra. All right, very good. And then in verse number 6, in that city, what did the centurion do? So they're there in the port, and they're looking...
The ship sailed to Italy.
All right, so they're kind of a little bit on a little bit of a layover, right? You think about, they're going to get a connecting ship to go from Myra up to Italy, trying to get them closer to Rome. Then they boarded that ship. Verses 7 through 8, look at those. What difficulties did they have? All right, so they're still,
Snitus?
okay, so they're dealing with some difficulties with wind in that verse. What did you say, Jody?
Oh, that's the difficulty off, that was the city.
Yeah, okay.
Not everybody else to-
Right. So, Paul, or not Paul, but Luke says that they came to a place named what? Fair Havens. All right, so I am not going to try to pronounce this, but it still exists today. It's in the Greek. It's spelled Kaloi. Kaloi, maybe? I don't know. I'm not a Greek expert. Kaloi. And then the second part is Limenes. And when you translate that into the English, it's translated Fair Havens. So I'm thankful that the translators translated that into English for us. But that's part of Crete, if you're familiar with the island of Crete. And it still exists today. Verses 9 through 12, Luke says that their sailing was dangerous because a fast was over. So why would this have been a dangerous time?
Maybe people were hungry and they would get mean.
Okay,
There
so
wasn't enough food, or if they were really hungry and you had food, then
that might be part of it. I mean, fasting certainly does play a part of your stamina and your.
Fasting is over, then it says, so that what have they done? They've now ate.
But you got to think about the timing of when this fast was. This was the day of atonement, and so it was right in that part of fall, like right before winter. And what happens in late fall and early winter? Bad weather happens. You know, I used to think that tornadoes only happened in early spring, and it also, there's that late period of storms too.
Those ones are actually more deadly. They tend to be more like Category 5.
So sometimes in October and November, you can have tornado outbreaks.
The hurricane season in Florida lasts till November.
The gales of November, they came early.
So you read my notes, because I was going to say, living here in the Great Lakes, we understand weather changes, fall time. You know, they even say the Lake Superior can create its own weather systems because you have the clash of the cold air and the warm air, and then you have the water temperatures. And so what sank in November 1975? The Edmund Fitzgerald, because of that huge storm that took place. So they're facing some weather challenges because of the time of year that this has taken place. But what did Paul warn them about? It was going to end in a disaster.
And is it saying in there that the cargo, maybe the cargo's gonna be spoiled, so when they get there, they won't be able to join it?
Well,
Not only the laden of the ship, but also our lives are in danger.
yeah, so Paul's telling them the cargo, the ship, and the lives.
They were gonna go down.
Yeah, it was going to end up bad. But who did like a Titanic, right? But who did the centurion listen to?
The helmsman, the owner of the ship.
All right. So why would a centurion listen to those guys?
Well, that's a sailor.
They're sailors,
overboard.
and
They
Paul's
don't like what you're
technically
saying.
not.
They're sailors. But do you think that maybe the owner of the ship and the helmsman, the captain of the ship, do you think they'd have some motives to sail? Yeah, it's money. It's money. That's Titanic. Didn't the Titanic get involved in stuff like that?
Yes.
They were trying to make. In fact, wasn't there stories about they were warned they were told that they needed to slow down to be able to better navigate the water, and the owner's like, nope. You know, we have deadlines. We need to.
That's placed against them at the time that they were arriving too.
So these ships, and who knows what their cargo was? I mean, it could have been something that might have spoiled, which would cost them a lot of money. You know, you watch, those TV shows on like the History Channel, those deep sea fisher guys, fishing for the crabs. They don't want to lose their cargo. I mean, it's going to cost them a pretty penny if they do. I think somebody was saying something over here.
Oh, I was just gonna say, the sooner they get the load deliver their job done, they can take another load, so.
Oh yeah, I mean,
They have winter over winter.
so we might not be sailors, but you're out driving on the highway and then we're surrounded by semi trucks, right? And those guys have delivery times and the weather gets bad. And I've talked with drivers and weather gets bad and they call their dispatch and their company. They don't care. They got deadlines. They got to get the freight and the product to wherever they're going. And some of those guys are crazy anyway, and they're just going to do it
They
because,
say to them, we'll give you hazard pay. What good does hazard pay do?
Yeah, hazard pay is not gonna pay me if I'm dead.
right.
Second.
So what harbor did they try to get to in order to winter there? Phoenix, Arizona. That's a good place to winter.
Landlocked.
Wrong thing.
Phoenix, well, somebody said it. Crete. All right, very good. Phoenix, Crete. So Paul's travel begins. It's beginning with some difficulty. Paul gives him some warning. But who is Paul? He is certainly not a sailor. But, he had been traveling a lot, so I'm sure Paul had seen a thing or two. But they didn't listen to him. All right. So,
Some of those nautical terms that you mentioned, okay? Yours says sail in verse 2, but I've got launched,
Launched.
which would be a true
Yeah.
nautical term.
yep, that's right.
Launched.
Yeah, launchman.
Set forth.
Yep. You watch some of the launchings of some of those new ships that they make, right, when they have them in the dry dock and then they're going to put them out. Man, it's pretty amazing to watch that. Quite the-
And cargo, well, cargo, you have that with any type of, but when they say laden, that's normally referring to shipping,
Yep. All right, so yeah, we're going to even see some more of these terms used here in the next bunch of verses. So verses 13 through 38, we see Paul's ship. The ship that he's on is caught in a storm. So let's read that together. Starting in verse 13. When the south wind blew softly, supposing that they had obtained their desire, putting out to sea, they sailed close by Crete. But not long after, a tempestuous head wind arose, called Euroclydon. So when the ship was caught and could not head into the wind, we let her drive. And running under the shelter of an island called Clauda, we secured the skiff with difficulty. When they had taken it on board, they used cables to undergird the ship, and fearing lest they should run aground on the Syrtis sands, they struck sail and so were driven. And because we were exceedingly tempest-tossed, the next day they lightened the ship. On the third day we threw the ship's tackle overboard with our own hands. Now when neither sun nor stars appeared for many days, and no small tempest beat on us, all hope that we would be saved was finally given up. But after long abstinence from food, then Paul stood in the midst of them and said, Men, you should have listened to me and not have sailed from Crete and incurred this disaster and loss. And now I urge you to take heart, for there will be no loss of life among you, but only of the ship. For there stood by me this night an angel of the God to whom I belong and whom I serve, saying, Do not be afraid, Paul. You must be brought before Caesar, and indeed God has granted you all those who sail with you. Therefore take heart, men, for I believe God that it will be just as it was told me. However, we must run aground on a certain island. Now when the 14th night had come, as we were driven up and down in the Adriatic Sea, about midnight the sailors sensed that they were drawing near some land, and they took soundings and found it to be 20 fathoms. And when they had gone a little further, they took soundings again and found it to be 15 fathoms. Then, fearing lest we should run aground on the rocks, they dropped 4 anchors from the stern and prayed for day to come. And as the sailors were seeking to escape from the ship, when they had let down the skiff into the sea, under pretense of putting out anchors from the prow, Paul said to the centurion and the soldiers, Unless these men stay in the ship, you cannot be saved. Then the soldiers cut away the ropes of the skiff and let it fall off. And as day was about to dawn, Paul implored them all to take food, saying, Today is the 14th day, and you have waited and continued without food and eaten nothing. Therefore I urge you to take nourishment, for this is for your survival, since not a hair will fall from your head of any of you. And when he had said these things, he took bread and gave thanks to God in the presence of them all. And when he had broken it, he began to eat. Then they were all encouraged and also took food themselves. And in all, we were 276 persons on the ship. So when they had eaten enough, they lightened the ship and threw out the wheat into the sea. And so let's pause there and let's go back to verse 13. Luke says a gentle south wind blew. They thought everything was going to be all right in the beginning. They go out to sea. They sailed near Crete. But things take a turn for the worse, doesn't it? Verse number 14, what does Luke call the wind that rose up? All right. What was the name of it, Catherine? All right, very good. So he does describe it as being tempestuous. We'll talk about that, or tempestuous, kind of a tough word. Addison, I know the ESV calls it something different. Verse 14.
Northeaster?
Yes, it calls it a northeaster. Are we familiar with that term here in the United States? Yeah. That's the kind of wind it was. I think the ESV translators were trying to spare people from trying to read that word. Does the King James uses that same word, doesn't it?
So if we break it down the way that Euro mean for Europe, so it's a European eastward wind.
All right, so it's from the northeast, and he also describes it as tempestuous. That's where we get our English word typhoon, right? Yeah. So what is a typhoon? Well, it's a storm, but that's what they call hurricanes over in Asia. So it's a hurricane. Typhoon's a hurricane. Google it. No? Google it. Isn't a typhoon a hurricane?
Yeah, a tropical cyclone in the western Pacific Ocean or northern Indian Ocean having
Okay.
sustained winds of at least 64 knots, aka 74 miles per hour. Typhoons form in waters with surface temperatures of about 80 degrees Fahrenheit, intensifying as temperatures rise.
All right, so it's a hurricane.
But where did you say hurricane?
Okay, well, you watch the news, and next time they have a hurricane out in the Philippines or that type of area,
They don't say hurricane.
they say typhoon. That's what I'm saying. Come on, man, we got to move on. We got 44 verses to get through. Let's go. All right, so what could they not do? They are not Jim Cantori. They could not go into the head of the wind, right? So they were at the mercy of the wind. Literally, the idea there is they could not go into the head of the wind, is the idea that they couldn't look into the wind's eye. They couldn't face the wind. And so that northeast, from the northeast, was going to blow them off course. Ellicott says in his commentary, the figure is a sufficiently natural one in all languages, but it perhaps received additional vividness from the fact that a large eye was commonly painted on the prow of Greek vessels. That's pretty interesting too. So Greek vessels typically have that large eye, and so they were not able to look into that storm. It turned them around. The direction now they would be traveling in would be which way? Southwest. All right, very good. So the wind's coming from the northeast. That would turn them around, blow them southwest. The ship, again, was mercy at the sea. It drifted. It drifted somewhere in regard about 23 miles from one island, Crete, to Clauda. Verse number 16, what else did they have difficulty doing?
Actually, winds mixed up here.
What?
Huh?
What?
If it's an easter wind, it means it's moving to the east. Therefore, the way that you would turn would be to the east.
Listen, it's a northeast. It's a nor'easter. A nor'easter in New England comes from northeast and blows that direction off the ocean. So if it's blowing that direction, it's going to turn you around. You're trying to mess me up with my directions. Anyway, they were at the mercy of the winds. What else did they have difficulty doing? What do they have difficulty securing? the skiff. What in the world's a skiff?
It's the boat that
That's the
takes them
dinghy.
from the ship
It's,
to the
it's,
shore.
it's a dinghy. It's a ship to the shore. They've,
Dinghy.
I don't know. I don't think one little skiff could hold 200 and some odd
Yeah,
people.
it's like, wait a minute, it wouldn't really help you to have a skiff anyway, but they have.
So some described it as kind of a lifeboat, but maybe that lifeboat would be for the most important people on the ship.
It probably wasn't gonna be tall when it was all said and done.
Probably not. All right, verse 17. What did they use underneath the ship? All right, so what were the cables there for?
Tie stuff down.
Tie stuff down? No.
Undergird the ship.
All right, so what would it mean to undergird the ship?
Is to keep the ship from falling apart.
Yeah, to keep it together, to give it some support, because they feared something. What was their fear? Running aground, and so these cables were going to keep the ship together. So we can just imagine the waves were just beating on this ship, pretty fierce.
Well, also, if, according to what you're saying, if they were going down this way, there's nothing there. They're just in all open water.
Yeah.
Compared to if they had gone north.
So for them to put the cables underneath, I researched this a little bit. It's also a nautical term known as frapping. Frapping. So that's not what your Starbucks barista does for you. I'm waiting all day to say that. It's no, it's again
Frappe, not frappe.
Yeah, right. So it's putting the cables underneath. Ancient sources reference quicksand in the northern part of Africa as well as the Mediterranean Sea that sailors feared. It was quicksand, and there have been stories of ships getting stuck in that, and they feared it, and they did not want that to happen to them. What does Luke call this? Starts with an S.
Syrtis.
All right, Syrtis Sands. What did they do with their sail? All right, Addison used another translation. What is the? All right, so the King James, the New King James says they struck the sail. So they were out there beating it, right? Wasn't even the sail's fault. That was the wind's fault. So it means that if you use the ESV like Addison, you have a better idea. It means they lowered the gear. So it wasn't just the sail that they lowered. There was other stuff that they lowered, right?
They lowered the booms.
They lowered the booms. They lowered the ropes. They lowered the rigging as well. Why would they have lowered all those things from the ship?
Because they break and fall.
Well, they break and fall, but what else would you
They
think?
can
This?
also prevent you or the winds from carrying you where you need to, so if the winds are going one way and you're stuck with going the other way,
Okay.
you can flip the ship.
Okay, and that's an idea. Here you have a ship, and here you have the stuff, and you have all this. How about weight up top? Doesn't it make you a little bit top heavy? So
This is
if you're,
kind of the way.
yeah, if you're top heavy and a wind takes you, a big wave comes and hits you, you could capsize really easy. All right, so they lowered all that stuff. They didn't want to be top heavy. Did the storm continue the next day?
Yes, for many days.
All right, and what did they do that next day?
Lighten the ship.
They lightened the ship. So they got out their candles, they got out their oil lanterns, they got out their solar lights. No. Okay.
Weight. They threw stuff overboard to lighten the weight.
Okay. So why would that be important?
Lawn chairs.
Their lawn chairs.
Yeah, the G's lounge.
Yeah, I mean, like some lawn chairs are light. Some of them are. Why would you want to lighten your
So
load?
you sit on top of the water more.
All right. Yeah. Get the ship up.
Buoyancy.
Buoyancy. Get yourself up a little bit. So put a little distance between you and the bottom of the sea. Don't want to run aground. It's very similar to what we read in Jonah chapter 1 in the first part of verse number 5. You remember when Jonah ran away from God and he got on that ship and there was a storm that arose, and the Bible tells us that Jonah went under the deck and he was sleeping, but the mariners, they were afraid, the Bible says, and every man cried out to his God and threw the cargo that was in the ship into the sea to lighten the load. And so a lot of sailors are used to that custom. What do they do on the third day of this storm? Verse 19.
They got rid of the tackle.
Okay, so is this a football term?
Yes.
Yeah, they throw the big guy off the
Shoot the
ship.
big guy off this ship.
Like, that's some weight
They
going on.
said, go long, and they
Go
took it
long.
off the end of the, and everybody jumped off to go get it.
So yeah,
Definitely lighten the ship.
so
They didn't think that fishing was important, so they got rid of their.
and I was thinking like football or like fishing tackle, right? Well, it's a little bit more than that. The term
It's
tackle
too
is
stormy for us to fish anyway.
no sharks here. So the tackle is equipment, being furniture, which could be things such as beds, personal luggage, utensils, anything that was movable, like the nose tackle. He's overboard. Just kidding about the nose tackle. But all of them, this shows us something. They were all willing to sacrifice something for a chance of safety.
They were scared.
Yeah, and these were seasoned sailors, and
So
yet
it's
they
only what
were.
kind of storm they were in that they were like that nervous that they're like, okay, listen, we liked this yesterday, but now we gotta really get rid of some stuff.
Yeah, right. So how does Luke describe the sky during this particular time, and is there any significance to
No
that?
sun, nor star.
All right. What would be the significance of that?
That meaning that it was nothing but a downpour.
Well, nothing but a downpour.
They were going because they couldn't map the stars.
That's what they got.
That's how they navigated. So they didn't know where they were at, and they wouldn't know until this storm let up and the skies cleared out. How were they feeling at this particular time?
They'd given up.
They'd given up. They had lost all hope. So it's pretty bad when you lose hope. There's not much else, is there? So they lost hope, and they lost hope that they were going to be saved. Verses 21 through 26, what had they abstained from for a long time? All right, food, and the Great Fast was already over. So now they were not eating, right? And I can't imagine, most of these guys were pagan guys anyway, so they weren't participating in the Fast of the Atonement. So now they're not eating. Why do you think they weren't eating?
Because if you don't have something on your stomach, you don't have nothing to hurl.
All right, so seasickness would be probably a big part of, and they probably didn't have a whole lot of time either, right? They're not going to be
busy
like,
working.
yeah, they're busy.
They're trying to survive.
Yeah, so seasickness could have been a part of that. Paul references some of this in 2 Corinthians chapter 11, some of the things that he endured, verse 25 in particular. But what encouraging words, right, did Paul give? Because Paul does give them he gives them that glimmer of hope. What does he say to them, verse 22?
That God will spare us. Not a single one of us will perish.
All right, so
Be
That-
of good cheer.
all right, so have some courage, right? Be of good cheer, change your demeanor, have some confidence. Nobody was going to die, but something else was going to happen.
The ship.
The ship was going to go down. All right, so how
That
did?
make that captain very happy at that moment.
Yeah.
If
How-
you're gonna lose your ship,
But at
Yeah.
that point, it didn't matter because they pretty much threw all of the stuff that he was going to make money off of overboard anyway. So.
I was
Yeah,
just
so
thinking how they had the fish, you know, and Jesus made all the extra, well, we got that little dinghy. And so they're gonna make that boat big enough for all these guys to go in the dinghy.
So how did Paul say that he knew this?
An angel told
All right, an angel of who?
them, okay.
the God he serves.
The God that he serves. And I am confident because there is no other God. I am confident that none of those other pagan gods that those people believed, not a single one of their gods, paid any visits to them and told them that they'd be okay. Because remember, Jesus made a promise to Paul. What was the promise? You're going to go to Rome, and who's he going to have an audience with? Caesar. And so Jesus is going to keep that promise. What does Paul demonstrate in verse number 25? Faith, okay. Maybe anything else?
Confidence.
Confidence, so some faith and confidence in God. And he wanted the other men to have that as well. Something bad was going to happen, though. What did Paul prophesy was going to happen? Verse 26.
You have to run aground on a certain island.
Yikes. They didn't want that. That was one of their main fears, right? They did not want to run aground. That's why they kept lightening the load. But they were going to have to do that. All right, verses 27 through 32, Brother Ray Exum in his class notes, he makes a reference to a Bible scholar who was also a sailor. And this particular gentleman calculated that the average drift in the Mediterranean at 36 miles an hour, if you were to do that for a 24-hour period of time, he calculated that from Crete or Malta would be 476.6 miles. And he calculated that the voyage would take 13 days, 1 hour, and 21 minutes. Now, isn't that really close to what Luke said happened? They were out there bobbing around for 14 days there in verse 27.
In this part here, they took depth readings.
Yeah, well, we'll get to that. We'll get to that. Yeah.
I'm leaving very quickly.
Okay, I'm sorry. Well, but it was late at night. They realized something, right? They realized that they were near the land. How do you think that they could realize they were near land? Were they just guessing? It was dark. There was no light.
Birds.
Maybe birds. I think some people speculate, though, the way the sound was coming at them off the land. You can,
Especially if you're a sailor,
you can recognize different sounds. All right, verse 28. John's really excited about this. They took soundings, right? How did they take these soundings? They didn't use radar. Like right today, we have radar.
They dropped line.
They
They dropped the line.
dropped the line. Yep.
And they had that line marked at fathoms, which is, a fathom is 6 feet.
All right, very good. So what was their first reading?
It was 20 fathoms
20.
or 120 feet.
120 feet. And then they went a little bit further and they took another sounding. And how
15.
15,
Or 90 feet.
90 feet. So that indicated to them,
Hey, we're
it tells
getting
us they were getting close to land. They needed to be ready for it. Verse 29, they didn't want to crash on the rocks, so what did they do next?
Dropped 4 anchors.
All right, drop 4 anchors from the stern, which is what part of the ship? All right, it's the back of the ship. Very good. And then they prayed for something.
for day to come.
All right, prayed for day to come. Now, some people say that word pray means that they were wishing it. They were wishing that daylight would come. They were trying to do their very best to stabilize the ship. Again, the word prayed there is a deep wish. They were just deeply wishing to survive the night. Verse 30, what did the sailors plan to do? Some of them made a plan, didn't they? They were going to escape in what?
In that skiff, sounds just like the Titanic.
Right. They were going to get in that little skiff and make haste. But they had a plan, didn't they? Luke even interjects kind of their plan of what they were going to do. What was their plan? What was their little scheme to kind of...
They were going to use the pretense of putting down anchors.
All right, so anchors in the front of the boat, get some people's attention in the front of the boat while they lowered the skiff in the back of the boat, and they were going to make some escape. Verses 31 and 32, what did Paul tell the centurion and the soldiers?
These men don't stay, we all die.
So that was kind of he knew, God must have told him, everybody needs to stay on the ship in order to survive. So what did the soldiers do?
They cut the lines of the skiff through the
Man, they cut. So what little hope that maybe some of the elitists on the ship had was now gone, right? Verses 33 through 38, why did Paul strongly encourage them to take food or to eat?
They were going to be safe.
Okay, they were going to be safe, but all right. Any other?
They have to be strong.
All right.
Also their strength too.
All right.
But kind of like, don't worry, it's all gonna work out.
All right. It's all going to work out. So you're going to have some confidence, have some faith, and you're going to need your strength for about what they were going to have happen to them.
Throw the rest of the food away so they wouldn't get any more soup.
It's now or never. What does he remind them again? Verse 34, they needed to eat to survive, right? None of them would be harmed. So do you think, what if none of them listened to Paul? What if people just started jumping overboard or,
Thank you for the money.
Speaking of,
thank you, trying to get away? God wouldn't be happy. He wouldn't be obeying.
they would have died
They would have died. And
somehow.
yeah.
They thought that was their only hope at that time.
What does Paul do in verse 35?
Right? Gave thanks to God.
It does, but it's not the Lord's
It's
Supper.
not.
Yeah, it's a common phrase. It depends on the context of it to determine what it is. He took bread and he ate it, but imagine this: it's in the midst of the ship sinking, the ship sinking, right? It's in the midst of the storm. He takes food, and what does he do with the food before he eats it?
Gives thanks.
Praise.
I think that's very interesting. That in the middle of a storm, a deadly storm, he found a reason to thank God.
And he has confidence that it's all gonna be okay.
So wouldn't there be a life lesson for us, like if we're going through some tough times in our life,
Always something to give thanks for. Our God is an amazing God.
Yeah.
All the time.
yeah, even in those storms, right? So Paul gives it to everybody else to eat. How many were on the ship?
276.
All right, 276. After they were strengthened with nourishment, what did they do?
Throughout the week.
All right, they threw out the leftovers and into the sea. They had no hope in their minds, some of their minds. They had no further use for the items. They're going to throw it out. So a lighter ship means something else. Not only would it not run aground, but it means that they could get closer to that land that they were just doing those sound readings from. And they could get away from the rocks. All right. But we're going to find that they couldn't quite make it to shore, and so they were shipwrecked off the shore on this island. Verses 39.
No, because Paul told them.
Right? All right, so verse 39, when it was day, they did not recognize the land, but they observed a bay with the beach onto which they planned to run the ship if possible. And they let go the anchors and left them in the sea. Meanwhile, loosing the rudder ropes, and they hoisted the mainsail to the wind and made for shore. But striking a place where two seas meet, they ran the ship to aground, and the prow stuck fast and remained immovable. But the stern was being broken up by the violence of the waves. And the soldiers' plan was to kill the prisoners, lest any of them should swim away and escape. But the centurion, wanting to save Paul, kept them from their purpose and commanded that those who could swim should jump overboard first and get to land, and the rest, some on boards and some on parts of the ship, and so that it was that they all escaped safely to land. So did they survive the night?
Yes.
And what did they? And the next day, what did they see?
Land.
All right, so they saw land on an unknown island, and they planned to run that ship to the land, didn't they? But the plan didn't go as well as they'd hoped, but they let go of the anchors. Did they pull the anchors back on board? No, because they would have been heavy. It would have just added more weight, so they just let them go back into the ocean, or left them in the ocean. They let go of the rudder ropes as well. They hoisted the mainsail, and they make their way for the shore. Did they make it?
No.
Nope. Instead, they ran aground where what comes together? Two seas met. Very good. So the ship was there stuck. It was immovable. And we just imagine the waves beating on this ship. What does Luke say happened to the stern?
It was being broken up by the violence of the waves.
All right. And the place that they ran into was more than likely like a sandbar, kind of sticking out or very near the surface. Verses 42 through 44, what did the soldiers plan on doing?
Kill the prisoners.
All right, kill the prisoners because they were concerned about something.
Escape, so many would escape.
Because they were all going to escape. But who intervened? Right, so the centurion again intervenes for Paul. I just think that's really interesting that time and again we see these Roman men coming to rescue Paul, so to speak. And since Paul wanted to keep all the prisoners alive, were all the prisoners spared? And what did the centurion command? All right.
Swim to jump overboard and first get to land.
All right, so those that could swim, jump overboard, start making your way to land. If you couldn't swim, you got to jump out and grab a ship part. Maybe that skiff, maybe parts of that had floated around there. I don't know, all kinds of parts. the rum barrel, and then it could have been a few barrels. You just imagine that, right? The people are, the
Leaving the
Well, mostly had to be parts of the ship because they had already gotten rid of all that stuff.
yeah.
yeah,
The waves were, I'm sure, taking.
pushing it all around, yeah. And how many survived?
Everybody.
They all survived, which confirmed what Paul was saying was the truth, right? I don't know, I looked through this chapter, again, there's a lot of detail in here, a lot of names, a lot of maybe some terms that we're not familiar with because, well, I'm not a sailor, but can research some of those. But you look through here, you see, lessons on faith, lessons about having confidence in God, having faith in God during trying times. And I was thinking about this, God didn't promise us that life was going to be perfect and that we would never have trying times, right? Think about Psalm 23. Yea, though I go through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, right? So God didn't promise us that we wouldn't face dark times, but he does promise us something else, right? What does he promise us?
Light at the end.
What's that?
Light at the end of the tunnel.
Light at the end of the tunnel. He promises to be there with us, right? While we're going through those things, and he's there for us. So life isn't always easy. And I like that part where Paul was praying for the food. And he thanked God for that. Even in that storm. Literal storm. All right, any other thoughts, comments, questions? Jody?
I mean, you see all of this that he went through, and I just think of when Philip was just caught up and taken over the eunuch, and I mean, God can just take him to Rome like this, but I mean, there's reasons for going through all this, whether it was the men on board, whether it was the centurion, whether it was to shape Paul a little bit more, but I mean, really rough time, there's reasons for it.
Yeah, God always has
God's
a reason
got
to do.
Reasons.
Yeah, I like that.
And Luke was there. And one of the reasons was for Luke to record this and so that we can read it today, right? And study from it. All right. Very good. Anything else?
Don't go sailing in open water.
What's that?
Don't go sailing in open water.
Just watch the weather forecast. Don't bring a lot of supplies.
Don't go if it's windy.
I think it's really neat that they didn't listen to him at the beginning, but he remains faithful to God, and they started listening to him.
That's
Even
right.
if he had going along with that, he had a very good influence on those people. 'Cause they were,
And they trusted him. He must have done some things in order for that centurion to trust him. So, I mean, Luke didn't include that, but he must have. Well, why else would you let your prisoner go see friends?
Right.
You land someplace, and I mean, he knew, right? Like today, there's the bondsman. They, you got to pay money, and to say yes, I'm going to come back to court. When the trial has. Paul was just, hey, you can just go.
they were all putting their lives in his hands, and listening to the instructions.
Yeah.
Well, like in prison, I mean, they prayed and they sang, and I'm sure that didn't stop just because they were on the ship. I mean, I'm sure that their light was shining all the time, and so their good attitude and their light probably helped everybody to know that they were different.
Yeah.
And the Bible doesn't tell us this, but you almost wonder how many of those men ended up being our brothers
Yeah.
because of Paul's influence.
Yeah. That's right.
And one more thing, he said that they were gonna have to run ashore. They're gonna have to land. So if they would've just done that in the first place, they could've saved a lot of stuff that
Wow.
they threw overboard.
Yeah.
And Paul's like, see, told you. Why do we do?
They
No.
kept throwing and throwing
But see,
and
but
waiting
the
and
angel
waiting.
said this is what's going to happen, and because they didn't listen, they probably went through a lot more. So if they would have listened when the angel told Paul, hey, this is what you need to do, they might have saved themselves a lot of aggravation. So sometimes we should just listen to the Lord.
Yeah.
And they also
Well,
went into a bay. and
yeah, they didn't want
into
to.
the bay.
Yeah, they didn't want to land in that quicksand.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they were trying to get to that bay.
So
To, yeah,
they needed that lighter ship.
yeah. So it all worked out.
But I would have had them land in the right spot.
It all worked out. And sometimes God allows us to make bad choices to
Yeah.
teach us lessons. And
Sometimes we just think we can to do it,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
we're gonna do it our way.
All right. So I think we're done with chapter 27. We'll be on the last chapter next week. And I think Dad volunteered to close us out with the word of prayer. So,
Yeah, we're always see one under here,
all right.
ant traps out.
Yeah.
We're praying.
That's all right. Dad'll close us with prayer, and then we'll do we'll look at the ant situation.
Go ahead.
Father in heaven, we're so thankful for this wonderful lesson we just heard. We're thankful, Father, to read about Paul, his journeys over the sea. We're thankful, Father, that you watched over them, blessed them, even though they had a tough time. We're thankful, Father, that all of them came out okay. We can laugh today, Father. Sometimes think how rough we're having it now. There's nothing like they had back in those days. We're so thankful, Father, that we can call on you anytime. And we can depend on you, Father, to help us. Continue to help us to realize we've got to help ourselves do all the things that you want us to do, Father. Go with us now, Lord, as we go into this night. Bless us, Father, and help us to be back in services again Sunday morning. Thank you, Father, for everything. All this blessing we ask in Christ's name. Amen.
Amen. All right. Thank you. Let's have a good night. Bye. Good night.
Happy birthday